The vast darkness of space trembled as the Vroken Imperium's grand fleet drifted into Earth's orbit, their warships gleaming under the golden rays of the distant sun. The Vrokans were no strangers to conquest. They had dominated over 100 species, crushing resistance with ease and demanding absolute surrender from every civilization they encountered. Their scouts had been observing Earth for weeks, analyzing human society, technology, and military capability. While humans seemed advanced in some ways, they lacked the interstellar warships and planetary defenses that would make them a true threat. The Vrokans assumed this would be yet another routine conquest land, issue demands, and absorb the species into their ever-growing empire. However, to maintain the illusion of diplomacy, the High Command ordered a small envoy to visit the planet first. A simple formality before the inevitable subjugation. As the Vrokan delegation descended into Earth's atmosphere, their ship cut through the sky like a blade, announcing their presence with a controlled yet thunderous entry. They expected fear, chaos, and desperate negotiations. Instead, they were met with something far more unnerving: an invitation. Humanity did not respond with panic, hostility, or immediate surrender. Instead, they extended a warm and polite message: "Welcome to Earth. We would be honored to host you for a formal diplomatic dinner." The Vrokans were momentarily confused. In the thousands of worlds they had encountered, no species had ever responded to first contact with hospitality. It was unheard of. Yet, their orders were clear: accept the invitation, assess the species, and prepare for annexation. And so, with cautious curiosity, the Vrokan diplomats stepped onto human soil, unaware that they were walking into the most terrifying experience of their existence. The dinner was to be held in a grand human establishment, a place called an embassy hall. The setting was elaborate, with golden chandeliers casting a warm glow over a massive table covered in fine fabrics. Strange, yet pleasant aromas filled the air, wafting from steaming plates of food carefully arranged in front of them. The humans smiled, their expressions unreadable to the Vrokans. It was unsettling. Vrokans had sharp, predatory faces, and their species did not smile. Baring teeth was a sign of aggression in their culture. Yet these humans grinned constantly, their expressions filled with an odd mixture of excitement and something the Vrokans could not understand. The diplomats took their seats, stiff and wary, their reptilian eyes scanning the strange objects placed before them, shining metallic tools with sharp edges. The humans lifted these knives and forks with practiced ease, twirling them between their fingers as they spoke in friendly, enthusiastic voices. One human, a high-ranking representative, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "We've prepared a special meal just for you," he said, his voice laced with warmth. "It's a tradition of our people to share a feast with our guests." The Vrokans exchanged nervous glances. A feast? In their culture, food was a simple utilitarian thing, a tasteless nutrient paste designed only for sustenance. There were no meals, no flavors, no special preparations. Yet here, the humans spoke of food with a deep reverence, describing the intricate ways they cook, season, and prepare it to perfection. One diplomat hesitantly asked, "What exactly will we be eating?" The human's smile widened. "Oh, just something special. Meat, prepared in the finest way possible." A deep silence filled the room. "Meat?" The Vrokans stiffened, their clawed hands tightening against the table. Among their kind, the very concept of eating flesh was an ancient horror, a practice of long-extinct warlords who once devoured their enemies to absorb their strength. It was a taboo so vile that even speaking of it was considered a crime in most Vrokan cultures. And yet, these humans, they spoke of it so casually. Before the Vrokans could respond, the food arrived. Massive plates were set before them, revealing thick, glistening slices of roasted flesh, steam rising in delicate swirls. The scent was rich, overwhelming, foreign. The humans carved into the meat with their knives, slicing through it with practiced precision, chewing with satisfaction. One diplomat nearly recoiled as a human commented, "Ah, this one's been aged perfectly. The texture is just right. Razor-sharp edge with an approving nod." "Perfect. The sharper the better," the human muttered. Korik's mind raced with possibilities. Were these weapons meant to intimidate them? Or was this some primitive display of power? But before he could voice his concern, the blades were lowered not toward them, but toward the table, toward the steaming, glistening pieces of roasted flesh that had been placed before them. The humans began slicing through the meat, cutting with precision, their hands steady and practiced. Korak felt his throat tighten. His kind did not consume flesh. To the Vrokans, the very idea of tearing into the body of another living creature was an act of savagery, of ancient, forgotten monsters. It was something that had been buried in history, something too horrific to speak of. And yet, these humans not only partook in the act, they celebrated it. The humans spoke as they ate, detailing the process of preparing their meal. They spoke of the importance of seasoning, of cooking the flesh at the right temperature, of ensuring that the juices ran clear, and that the texture was just right. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and an easy grin, chuckled as she spoke. Nothing's worse than overcooked meat. Ruins the flavor completely. Another nodded in agreement. Oh, and the best cuts? You have to tenderize them properly. You want them soft enough that they just fall apart when you bite in. The Vrokans barely held themselves together. Tenderize? Soft enough to fall apart? They had encountered terrifying species before, but nothing, not a single war-hungry empire. Not even the monstrous creatures of the dead moons had ever spoken with such detailed pleasure about the destruction of flesh. Korak struggled to keep his voice steady as he spoke. This meat, where does it come from? A human, mid-bite, paused and raised an eyebrow. Oh, this? Just some beef and pork. Korak's translator failed to process the terms. The words meant nothing to him. His mind immediately assumed the worst beef and pork must be the names of subjugated species, creatures that had fallen to human conquest and were now nothing more than a food source. Panic surged through the delegation. Korak could see the alarm mirrored in the eyes of his fellow diplomats. Their hands trembled. Their bodies remained stiff. The realization hit them all at once. They were seated at a table of predators. One of the younger Vrokans, barely out of his training, let out a strangled gasp and shoved away from the table. His chair screeched against the floor as he stumbled backward, his chest heaving in horror. The humans turned, surprised by the reaction. Everything all right? One of them asked. All right? No, nothing was all right. Korak barely managed to keep his voice level. We must take our leave. At once. The Vrokans pushed away from the table, moving with an urgency they could barely contain. Their hearts thundered in their chests as they rushed toward the exit, their visions swimming with the image of humans grinning over freshly cut flesh. They had seen enough. The humans were not warriors. They were something far worse. Back aboard their ship, Korak's trembling hands activated a direct transmission to the Vrokan High Command. His voice was hoarse, almost breathless as he spoke. DONO, TENGAGETHUMANS. They are not like us. They are something else. Something ancient. Something terrifying. We must retreat. Now. And as their ship left Earth's orbit, leaving the cursed planet far behind, Korak realized something chilling. The humans never even realized what they had done. The Zarkani delegation had traveled light years to reach Earth, answering humanity's invitation for a grand diplomatic feast. Their species, cold-blooded and calculating, had encountered many civilizations in their journey across the stars. Some had been weak, begging for mercy. Others had been foolishly arrogant, challenging the Zarkani Empire and meeting their doom. But humanity was different. From the moment their ships entered Earth's orbit, something felt off. The humans were neither fearful nor aggressive. Instead, they welcomed the Zarkani with open arms, offering nothing but hospitality. It was unnatural. No species was this friendly without reason. There had to be something hidden beneath the surface. The feast was held in an enormous hall, filled with golden lights and an overwhelming scent that clung to the air. The Zarkani, with their tall, scaled bodies and glowing yellow eyes, sat stiffly at the long table. Their sharp claws tapped against the polished wood as they observed their human hosts, who were already flashing their unsettling, toothy grins. Zarkani did not smile. Among their kind, baring one's teeth was an ancient signal of threat or dominance. And yet, these humans did it constantly. It was as if they were all on the verge of attack, yet their voices remained warm, their gestures welcoming. It made no sense. Large platters of food were brought out by human attendants, and the room filled with the sounds of knives scraping against plates, of liquid being poured into glasses, of low laughter and whispers. The Zarkani watched as steaming dishes were placed before them, covered in thick, rich sauces, the scent of roasted flesh heavy in the air. The leader of the human delegation, a broad-shouldered man with dark, knowing eyes, raised his glass and spoke. "Tonight, we share a meal as friends, a tradition among our people to welcome new allies." The humans lifted their glasses, waiting, expecting. The Zarkani hesitated. Their species did not partake in communal eating. Food was a necessity, not a social event. To consume in the presence of others was considered an intimate act, one reserved for the dying and the young. Still, refusing the gesture might be seen as disrespectful, and so, Commander Zrathok, the leader of the delegation, forced himself to comply. He reached for his glass, hesitated for only a fraction of a second, and then tilted the liquid past his lips. Immediately, his throat burned. The substance was sharp, unnatural, intoxicating. He barely managed to suppress a shudder as warmth spread through his body. Poison? No. A ritual. The humans were drinking it willingly, their faces flushed as they exchanged looks of amusement. Then came the true horror. The humans picked up their sharpened blades and tore into the flesh before them. The knives sliced through the meat with practiced ease, cutting apart the thick, glistening slabs. The scent of blood still clung to the air, faint but undeniable. The Zarkani's stomach twisted as they watched the humans chew, swallow, and hum in satisfaction. One human turned to Zrathak, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Try it," he encouraged. "It's been prepared perfectly." Zrathak hesitated. He stared down at the thick, darkened slab of meat resting on his plate. The juices pooled at the edges, staining the delicate white of the ceramic. He forced himself to remain calm. "What is this?" His voice was steady, but inside, his mind raced. The human chuckled, a deep sound that sent a chill down Zrathak's spine. "Oh, this? Just beef. Nothing to worry about." His translator failed. The word had no meaning. The other Zarkani shifted uneasily, their reptilian eyes darting around the room. Zrathak's pulse pounded in his head. He had spent decades in diplomacy, yet this was the first time he had felt true fear. One of the humans, a woman with dark hair, laughed lightly as she wiped her mouth with a cloth. "Of course, if you want something different, we also have pork, lamb, even veal, if you're interested." The words meant nothing. No translation. No context. And that was the most terrifying part. Zrathak's claws curled against the table as he struggled to make sense of it. He had studied humanity before arriving. Their wars, their inventions, their politics, everything had suggested that they were strategists, builders, survivors. But not once had he considered the possibility that they were something far worse. His mind screamed with the implications. They consume flesh. They consume it with pleasure. They prepare it, season it, carve it like artisans shaping stone. A young Zarkani beside him, barely out of training, let out a choked sound and pushed away from the table, his throat convulsing. The humans stared. Their expressions unreadable. Zrathak could see it now, how they watched, how they assessed, how they seemed to be waiting. He had to leave. Now. Zrathak rose sharply, his chair scraping against the floor. "Woo! We appreciate your generosity," he managed, his voice strained. "But I am afraid we must depart." The human leader's brows lifted. "So soon?" he asked. There was no aggression in his tone, only curiosity, and that made it worse. He did not understand. He did not realize what he had done. The Zarkani backed away from the table, their movements stiff and controlled. They did not run to run, would show weakness, and weakness meant death. The humans remained seated, their hands still gripping their sharpened blades, their faces still stretched in those unsettling, toothy grins. It wasn't until the Zarkani were safely aboard their vessel, the cold metal walls of their ship surrounding them, that the panic fully set in. One of the younger officers let out a sharp hiss. They eat their own," he whispered. "They carve them apart. They roast them in fire." Zrathak remained silent, staring out at the blue planet below. The realization sank deep into his bones, colder than the void of space itself. Humanity had not threatened them. They had not fired weapons, had not issued ultimatums. They had only invited them to dinner. And yet, that simple act had sent terror ripping through the Zarkani delegation, in a way no war ever had. As their ship pulled away from Earth's gravity, Zrathak sent a single transmission to the Zarkani High Command. His voice was hollow, void of the confidence he once carried. "Do not engage the humans. Avoid them at all costs. They do not conquer with weapons. They do not destroy with war. They feast." And deep in the vast halls of Earth, the humans merely continued their meal, never realizing they had just terrified an entire empire without ever lifting a single weapon. The Vorak delegation arrived on Earth with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The Vorak were a proud, warlike species, their reptilian hides thick with natural armor, their civilization built upon conquest and strength. When they had first encountered humanity's transmissions, an invitation to establish peaceful relations, the Vorak High Council had been skeptical. No species offered peace so openly. It was either a trap or a deception. Still, the humans had not threatened them, had not shown any signs of aggression, and the Council had decided to test the waters. A small diplomatic group was sent. Their task simple: observe, assess, and determine whether humanity was a threat or prey. Their ship landed in a vast open field where human officials waited with their ever-present toothy grins. Vorak did not smile. To bare one's teeth was a sign of imminent violence in their culture, and yet these humans flashed their teeth constantly, as if they were on the verge of an attack but held back at the last moment. It was disturbing, unnatural. But the Vorak did not react. They had faced horrors before. The first few hours of diplomatic exchange were uneventful. The humans led them through their cities, showing off their advanced technology, their massive structures, their seemingly endless supply of resources. The Vorak delegation noted every detail, analyzing strengths and weaknesses, mapping out potential war strategies just in case. But what confused them the most was the humans themselves. They were small, soft-looking creatures, yet they walked with the confidence of apex predators. They lacked claws, fangs, or natural armor, yet they spoke without fear. It was unnatural. Then came the disaster. It happened during what the humans called a casual gathering. The Vorak had been invited to a place called a park, where humans engaged in recreational activities. At first, the Vorak found nothing unusual. There were humans walking, sitting, playing with their young, and consuming food in the open air. But then, one of the human officials, a man named Jonathan Carter, decided to demonstrate human resilience. With an eager grin, Carter lifted a small, round object, holding it up for the Vorak to see. "This," he announced proudly, "is a watermelon." The Vorak delegation watched in silence. The object was large and green, harmless in appearance. Carter set it down on a table and, with a single swift motion, brought his fist crashing down onto it. The watermelon exploded. Red flesh and black seeds splattered in all directions. The sound of the impact echoed in the air. The Vorak froze. Their instincts screamed danger. To them, it was not a harmless fruit. It was an organic being, crushed with casual brutality. They had assumed the humans were small and weak, yet here was one of them, effortlessly shattering a creature's outer shell and exposing its insides with his bare hand. A low, horrified hiss escaped Commander Rathak, the Vorak leader. His claws twitched, his battle instincts firing on full alert. Was this a warning? A display of strength? A message? The humans laughed, a strange, rhythmic sound that sent a chill through the Vorak delegation. The Vorak did not laugh. In their culture, Laughter was the sound of a predator before it strikes. And then it got worse. One of the human children, a small, seemingly fragile thing, ran forward, scooped up a handful of the watermelon's insides, and shoved it into her mouth. The Vorak reeled back in horror. The humans did not just kill their prey, they devoured it alive. The child's mouth was stained with red, and she giggled, turning to her parents. "It's so sweet," she chirped. The Vorak could barely process what was happening. Rathek's mind raced. Sweet? Did they consume their prey while it still felt? The panic spread quickly. The Vorak began backing away from the humans, claws at the ready, their muscles tensed for combat. The humans, oblivious to the misunderstanding, continued laughing and chatting, completely unaware that their alien guests were on the brink of a full-scale diplomatic disaster. Rathek made a split-second decision. He activated his communicator, sending an emergency recall signal to their ship. This was a mistake. The Vorak could not afford to remain on this death world. If the humans could crush a being's skull with their bare hands, devour its flesh without hesitation, and teach their young to do the same, then they were too dangerous to engage. One of the humans, noticing their discomfort, stepped forward, reaching out a hand. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. Rathek flinched. The human was offering his hand. A challenge? A test of strength? Did he expect Rathek to crush it like the watermelon? Rathek did not know, and he did not intend to find out. With a final hiss of warning, he turned and strode away, his delegation following closely behind. The humans called after them, confused, but they did not stop. They marched straight back to their ship, sealed the doors, and launched into the sky before the humans could do anything more to terrify them. As they left Earth's atmosphere, Rathek composed a single urgent message to the Vorak High Command: do not provoke the humans. Do not challenge them. Their strength is beyond comprehension, their ways filled with horrors we cannot begin to understand. We witnessed them crush a living creature with a single strike and consume it raw while their young laughed. They are not warriors. They are something far worse. Avoid Earth at all costs. And with that, the Vorak vanished into the void, fleeing from a species that had never even realized they had caused terror. For centuries, the Galactic Dominion had expanded without resistance. No species had ever stood against them for long. Their war fleets were unmatched, their technology superior, and their rule absolute. When they encountered a new civilization, they followed the same pattern: demand surrender, crush defiance, and absorb the survivors into their empire. It had worked every time. Until they met humanity. At first, Earth had seemed like any other planet: small, unremarkable, primitive. The humans had no centralized planetary government, no fleets stationed in orbit, and no defensive planetary shields. It should have been an easy conquest. The Dominion's warships had arrived in the Sol system, sending out their usual transmission: surrender, or be annihilated. The response they received was odd. Instead of panic or desperate negotiations, the humans sent a simple reply: "Are you sure?" There was no hostility, no plea for mercy, just a question. The Dominion's warlords had laughed at the arrogance. They had seen this kind of false bravado before. It never lasted. They launched their invasion. That was their first mistake. The first fleet entered Earth's atmosphere, descending towards major population centers. Their weapons locked on targets, their dropships prepared for deployment. And then, nothing. The fleet systems flickered. Shields failed, engines shut down, targeting computers went dark. Without warning, thousands of Dominion warships plummeted from the sky, crashing like falling stars. The few ships that managed to retreat sent back panicked transmissions. They spoke of invisible attacks, of systems failing for no reason, of unseen forces dismantling their technology mid-flight. The Dominion did not believe them. Malfunctions happen. The second fleet was sent. It never made it past the moon. Sensors picked up no weapons, no energy readings, nothing at all. And yet, one by one, the ships vanished. Entire battleships blinked out of existence, their signals lost in the void. Not a single escape pod was recovered. Now the Dominion was concerned. No enemy had ever done this. Still, they could not accept the idea that a primitive world had outmatched them. They deployed the Third Fleet, the largest armada ever assembled, tens of thousands of warships, legions of soldiers, enough firepower to reduce planets to dust. The invasion force approached cautiously, scanning for any sign of what had happened to the first two fleets. And then Earth answered. A single transmission echoed across every ship in the fleet, overriding their systems. It was a human voice, calm, almost amused. "You don't seem to understand. This is not your war to win." And then the screaming began. Across the fleet, alarms blared as systems failed. Engines went silent, weapons turned offline, artificial gravity collapsed. Dominion soldiers found themselves weightless, choking on their own fear. And then, in the blackness of space, the impossible happened. Their ships began tearing themselves apart. Metal groaned as bulkheads crumpled inward. Armor plating peeled away like dead skin. Weapons disassembled themselves in midair. One by one, ships were reduced to floating debris, their crews helpless as the very ships meant to protect them became their tombs. Those who tried to escape in smaller vessels found their controls hijacked, their ships turned around and sent hurling into the nearest sun. The admiral of the fleet managed to send one final message before his flagship collapsed into a swirling mess of twisting metal. Retreat. Retreat now. The humans are not what we thought. Across the galaxy, panic spread like wildfire. The Dominion had never retreated. But now, the fleet that was meant to conquer Earth had been reduced to drifting wreckage, its survivors whispering of horrors they could not explain. The High Council demanded answers, but there were none. What had the humans done? There were no recorded attacks, no trace of advanced weaponry. It was as if the very universe had turned against the Dominion the moment they had set foot near Earth. And then came the most terrifying revelation of all. ASE, the surviving fleet, limped back to Dominion space. They received a final message from Earth. No threats. No warnings. Just a single sentence. This was only a lesson. Do not return. And the Dominion did not. They abandoned all plans of expansion. They sealed off entire star systems near human space, forbidding anyone from approaching Earth. They erased the invasion records, pretending it had never happened. Humanity was declared off-limits, and across the stars, whispers grew. The galaxy had known many conquerors. But humanity did not conquer. They did not wage war. They simply made their enemies leave. And in the end, that was far, far worse.